take it over.
Thanks. Well, we have a very limited amount of time to cover a lot of information. So since we already covered the introductions, we're going to skip through most of that here. But one thing I want to focus on is what Catherine was saying about submitting questions for the rest of the hour and a half that we have. The earlier you can send in any information about anything specific, any specific queries that you want us to take a look at, that would be helpful. That way we can get the information together and see if we can't get to some of those during the course of the presentation as opposed to doing it all at the end. The format's going to be somewhat conversational. But one of the things I'm hoping to get from people earlier is some volunteer work to give us your first name and your last name and let us play with that, because we're going to be doing a little bit of that right here off the beginning. The format for today here, we'll go right over in here. The format for, sorry, going back and forth into the webcast format, is conversational. We're going to be asking questions back and forth, and I'm going to be trying to highlight a lot of things using a lot of examples. Matt's going to be asking questions, and he's going to be moderating questions that are coming in. And to do that, we're going to be using multiple applications. The tool that we're looking at right now is called MindJet Mind Manager. It's a mind mapping application that allows us to organize information in more of a hierarchical, bubbled out map, so that way we can go through things pretty quickly in the structure. It's really great for brainstorming. It's also great for organizing information in unusual ways, more than just PowerPoint. We will be using PowerPoint. I've got about 100 slides that I tear through pretty quickly, and as we're doing that, we're also going to be looking at actual search results. We're going to be typing in some of these queries to see what comes up, and instead of getting too deep into all the intricacies of why one shows up versus another in terms of all the different signals that Google uses to rank a web page, we're going to talk about best practices. We're going to talk about some of the things in terms of the value of a link versus the kind of content you have in your site. But we're going to be talking at a more of a generalist view in terms of how to think about this kind of thing. And in the process of doing that, we're going to be using some SEO tools that are freely available on the web that you can go and download yourself to go play with this stuff so you can get your head wrapped around this kind of thing. The main topic for today is not just why everybody should care about SEO, but we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's specifically for publishers, and there are some things that are specific to book publishers and magazine publishers. And when we say publishers, we're really talking about traditional or offline people who have content that they're trying to migrate into ways that will help them reach new audiences or help them meet whatever business objectives they might have. So again, this isn't really a how to do, but it's a how to think about SEO presentation. So we will cover a lot of information, including what the differences between web search and what vertical search means when it comes to thinking about that from search engines perspectives, and the new addition in the last year of what we call universal search, where you see things like video and news and all the different vertical searches that they have integrated into a universal view, and what the impacts are for all of this. And more importantly, probably than anything, is try to evaluate how, as a publisher, you can fit into Google's ecosystem, which is something that we all live in right now to one extent or another. So we'll talk about the importance of content, we'll talk about the importance of links, but part of what we need to do is figure out where in the heck we're going to start, because that's always the first question. There's so much information. It's a fairly complex thing, but it's not really complicated in terms of understanding this stuff, but it's hard to know really where to get in the game with this stuff. So to warm up as an exercise, I thought one of the first things that we could do is actually go and take a look at some of the names from the folks in the conference or in the session here, and actually Google you, and we'll see what comes up, and we'll talk about why one web page might be showing up versus another. So we're going to jump over into Firefox now and see if we can't get a name out of the audience. Mac, do we have anybody who's volunteered yet?
No volunteers just yet.
Okay.
If you need somebody, you're welcome to use me, though.
You're our first victim.
But I take no credit for anything that pops up.
So we type in Max Locum, and we get a few different pages. We get the independentpublisher.com, and I'm assuming that that's your blog. Is that correct?
Yeah, one of many, unfortunately.
One of many, okay. So, which is an interesting thing, because for those of us who have multiple blogs out there where we have our name on those blogs, and we're posting frequently, and people are linking to us, those are typically the sites that are going to more likely be the ones that are going to show up in Google. And the questions that we're trying to answer to a certain extent is, well, why should one versus another rank? Typically, one of the easiest ways to look at this kind of thing is, even though the domain name is theindependentpublisher.com, you probably have a lot of people who recognize that that is a blog that's owned by you. And you've described it in your title tag up here in the About page. This is about Max Slocum, but more than likely there's a lot of people, or maybe even on your other social profiles, that will link back to this page using those exact words in their text links. And we're going to talk more about links and that kind of thing as we go in here. If we go down here, we've got pointer.org. Is that one of your profile pages?
Sure is, yes.
Okay, great. So we can keep on looking at these things here. We have a LinkedIn profile. We've got a publish2.com. Looks like that might also be a profile. So there's a lot of information, and some of these probably actually link back up to the independent publisher as maybe your primary blog. So that's one way of looking at this. And then, of course, we've got Twitter accounts are actually showing up in Google search results within the last few months. We're seeing a lot of that kind of thing happening. So you can kind of starting to get a sense of what might be happening there. If we look at Catherine, let me know if we have any other names that pop up. She's a very experienced publicist, and so she's kind of in a similar position where she has a lot of information about her. And Catherine, I don't know if this first one here is related to you specifically or not. Does that look familiar?
No, that's
oh, sorry.
That isn't me.
That isn't you. Okay, but you do have a. Is that your LinkedIn profile?
That is me. Yes.
That is you. Okay. All right. So this highlights something that's interesting: is that there's a different Catherine Baird out there. So maybe, for whatever reason, and this possibly in this situation because it's a news article, this could be a temporary bump. Maybe this isn't the first thing that's always showed up there, or possibly it is. But sometimes Google will throw in new results that are either fresh, they're in the news feeds more recently, to give it a boost because it's more topical or relevant or more recent, as opposed to having the links for a long time or being the most authoritative result. But one of the things to highlight here is that sometimes when you have multiple names that are exactly the same, it's harder for them to figure out which one is the best answer to any given query. And so, as we're talking about these kind of things, we start thinking about, well, what's the difference between a name or, say, a brand? So if we go into our PowerPoint stack here, and we start thinking about how, as we Google ourselves, what the difference is between my name and some other guy that might be named Jamie Lowe and where this pages might be showing up, we can think about that from a branding perspective. There was actually a great little movie that was made by this guy, Jim Killian, who went and Googled a bunch of people that had, or Googled his name and found all these guys that had the same name, and he went around and interviewed them to kind of get their story. But if you actually go off and Google Jim Killian right now, you can actually see some content about the work that he did and some newspaper articles about this kind of thing, but it's mostly about this guy and the movie that he made. So here we have the Washington Post, we've got GoogleMeTheMovie.com, and the Internet Movie Database, and so this probably didn't happen before he started this process. This is a result of the fact that he built the content and he publicized it, and that's why it's got the authority. So the reason that we're talking about this is because your name is your personal brand, and branding is a really important part, especially in today's day and age, about how you're going to rank for any specific query in Google. So this is also a really great entry point into thinking about keyword phrases. How do I rank for any keyword phrases, not just branded phrases, but any phrase at all? So there's a few different ways of thinking about this from a top-down level. If you want to get your name ranked in Google, or if you want to get your brand ranked in Google, or even if you're trying to come up with a category keyword phrase that you want to get ranked for, you have to ask yourself a few different questions. How hard is it going to be from a competitive standpoint for me to own that word in the top of Google results? And another question you should be asking is, should you own it? Because if it's not the most authoritative result, is it something that you really should be working for? Is that really a good long-term investment strategy? So we're going to go back a few months to the Harry Potter lawsuit. We're going to take a look at the Harry Potter brand. It's not only a name that's a fictional character in an entire franchise. So these are some of these screenshots are from a few months back, but we can see that when we type in Harry Potter, we've got people who are invested in the brand. We have Warner Brothers, we've got J.K. Rowling. Of course, we've got some of our universal news search information that's coming in. The lawsuit that took place back, I think it was back in April, was when the HP Lexicon is this librarian who compiled a bunch of information from her books and posted it on his website And until he decided he was going to turn it into an actual book for publishing, she was fine with it. She actually cited it as a reference in a number of different postings. Once he decided he was going to take it to print, though, she got upset. She sued him. And what was interesting is that if you look at the website, it's not really all that pretty, but it's very deep and it's very rich. There's lots of information in there, even today. If we look at the results for Harry Potter on the second page, this isn't a great result because most people don't typically scroll past the first 3 or 4 actual listings on the first page. But it does show that he's in what we call the strike zone. You're getting in close. You're in the top 30, and that's pretty impressive for a small librarian's website. Now, if we type in more terms, when we talk about what's called the long tail for any given keyword phrase, the keywords in this case are permutations of the main phrase that we want to talk about. So we have Harry Potter books. And he actually shows up on the first page of the results, and that's pretty impressive for a librarian's website. But if we talk really about the long tail in terms of all the ontological relationships between the Harry Potter universe and all the characters within it, for example, if we were to type in Sirius Black, we actually have Sirius Black as show up in the results in the HP lexicon page. And the reason that's happening is because he's got a page that's dedicated to Sirius Black. And this is one of the most important lessons for publishers is if you want to rank for anything, any type of content that's any of the books that you own or any of the magazines that you have, you need to make sure that it's formatted and published in an HTML format that search engines can read and understand and provide clear signals to them about what the content is about. As a user, I come to this page and I realize, well, this is actually a page about Sirius Black. I can see that pretty clearly in the title. And the content goes really deep. There's lots of information, lots of links to explore that topic or that specific character even more. If we go into Google, we can actually see that they have 9,440 pages of Harry Potter topics. And it goes deep, and I think those numbers actually are smaller now than it was a few months ago. There's still a lot of content in there. There's lots of examples like this. Ravenclaw House, he ranks number 1. You can see here again, same concept. This title that we're looking at here, sometimes we refer to this as what would be the main header of the page. And in the source code, we would use something called an H1 tag to help highlight that as a clue to Google. It's not the only thing that you can do in terms of optimizing your page, but it's one of the first things we typically look at is making sure that your page has a clear label for both users and for search engines. Same thing here for Death Eaters. We've got another page for Death Eaters. So the list just keeps on going on. Now, if we look at a couple of oddities about this, if we were to type in Deathly Hallows, you'll see that he shows up on the first page of results because he's got that page. But if we were to misspell the word and we typed in Deathly Hallows, you'll notice that the page actually still shows up here. So they actually, Google's really smart. I mean, we all know it by now that there's a lot of amazing magic that happens here. And they actually say, well, did you actually mean the Deathly Hallows? But they still are able to rank there. Now, if we look at the number 5 listing, the HP lexicon page, there's no indication that it should have shown up for a misspelling. So if we look in the source code, or sorry, not the source code, the cache of the page that Google has indexed in there, they actually provide a lot of information that they never used to provide before. They actually tell us these terms only appear in links pointing to this page. So on one hand, we have what's called page optimization, where we have a lot of information that's on a page that helps us understand what a page is about. And then we have links that point to those pages that help us understand what those pages are about. So there's 2 main components when you talk about SEO that we typically talk about. Of course, it goes much deeper than that, but those are the things we typically refer back to. So going back to the idea of ranking for a keyword phrase, if you can rank for your name, if you can rank for a brand, then you should, in theory, be able to rank for just about anything given the context that you're in. And speaking of context, this is something I want to make sure we get out of the way really quickly. We're going to talk about Google a lot today, but I don't want to forget that we actually are also talking about Yahoo, Microsoft Live, and Ask. If we look at the picture of what's going on in the world today, of course, the market is doing what it's doing right now. And just a few months ago, there was some question about, well, how much, Google share, of U.S. searches in the U.S., or sorry, search market share in the U.S. is there? There was a little bit of question. So, Hitwise has a number of 67% with Google, and Yahoo is 20%, and it trickles down from there. Compete.com has some slightly different information, but the numbers look pretty similar. And no matter how you slice the data, it looks something like this. This is the world that we live in right now. Google is basically consuming almost everything. It's bringing everything from the publishing world into it. It's taking over the search. Basically, it owns search. The game is not being won by Google. The game has been won by Google. However, having said all that, Google is broken. And it's been broken for a long time. Ever since the first web search text search engines have come along, they've struggled to try to solve the ultimate search problem, which is to try to eventually get to the point where you're on Star Trek and you're talking to the computer and saying, computer, give me whatever it is I'm looking for, and having them give you back the one answer that you want. This is their mission. This is what they want to do. They want to get all the world's information, not just web pages, but they want to get all the world's information and try to make it universally accessible and useful. That's a very big problem, and it's not something that's going to get solved in our lifetimes, more than likely. It's a very hard problem to solve. This is something that Udi Manber talks about quite a bit. He's the Google VP of Engineering, and he talks about the different reasons why it's so complex and it's so hard. When you think about search, we're still in the primordial soup. We're very early on in terms of being able to see where this thing is actually going to go. And Google is aware of this more than anybody. This is Google's CEO Eric Schmidt said this in Charlie Rose a couple of years ago. He says that when you get more than one answer to any query that you have, we consider that a bug, and that they have more bugs than anybody in the world. So they're aware that it's a problem. They're also aware that they need our help with this. And SEO, to a certain extent, has gotten a bad rap. A lot of people have, considered it be trying to get an unfair advantage or possibly cheating. But the truth of the matter is that at its base level, SEO is just about a way of communicating. And no matter who you are or what type of communication you might be engaging in, you can either go down a path of the dark or the light. You can either take advantage of something and manipulate people, or you can try to be transparent and honest. So that choice is up to you. So we're going to start diving in a little bit here in the next few slides on some of the basics about Google. So we have a frame of reference to talk back to. I'll go back and talk about some more specific examples. So when it comes to Google, we know that text links are important. If you know anything about them at all, you know that's. And the reason that links are important is because Google looks at them like their votes of confidence, of trust, and authority. Now, you've probably heard a lot about PageRank. PageRank, on its most basic level, is a way of mathematically calculating the trust and authority that any web page on the web might have. And they look at the different links from different pages to try to calculate that. It was the first part of the Google algorithm that really made a big improvement in Google, but it's a very small part of the overall algorithm. The problem with the voting analogy is that not all votes are created equal in this world. Not everybody just gets one vote. A lot of these votes have different properties. What I say in my text link is going to have a difference over just the fact that I have a text link. Who's providing the link, the credibility of the page that's linking to me, how much page rank it has, the authority and the trust that it's been given, does that pass over to the pages that are linking to me? Broken links, to further in the analogy a little bit, are like the hanging chads of SEO. If you have broken links, you have lost votes. So one of the things we talk about when we're starting to audit a site or diagnose problems we have is to try to figure out what the link profile is. That way we can fix anything that's broken, and that can have a big impact on where you rank in the future by making sure that those things are taken care of. And it also addresses good user experience. The thing about elections, though, is that it can be manipulated. All systems can be gamed, and it's pretty easy to actually game Google if that's the path that you decide to go down. That's not what we're talking about today, though. You should be aware as a publisher of a few things specifically about this, one of which is called the paid link debate, whether or not it's appropriate or legal or ethical to sell links on your website to help people pass PageRank. In its most basic form, if you sell a link, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that as long as you are doing it appropriately in the given context. If you don't care about Google, then I suppose you can do whatever you want to do. But Google specifically has a problem with this, is that if you label or if you sell a link on your website, you're not actually giving an editorial vote. You're not just giving that link freely to say, we trust these people, we are recommending these people, and here's how we describe them by using a specific type of text link. So if we go a little bit further along that, of course, there's more possible legal implications or moral implications for non-disclosure. But for Google specifically, that's something you need to be aware of. And if you don't label things appropriately, and we'll get into how that works, that can actually get you into trouble.
Hey, Jamie, we have a question.
Yes.
Does Google know the difference between an ordinary link and a link in a paid advertisement?
That's a great question. Well, okay. So I don't want to labor on this point for too long, but I will say that the way that they've asked people to label links is to use what's called a nofollow attribute in their link, which means if you go into the source code, you'll actually see that the Webmaster has added a small snippet of code inside the anchor text that says, we don't trust this link. Don't go out and do it. So the question is, as a Webmaster, if I don't go and label all of the links that were paid for, Google's going to penalize me to a certain extent. They're going to look at me as doing something potentially mischievous. The problem that I have with the answer to the problem that they have, and I understand the problem that they have because they're trying to gauge editorial links and the value of them compared to something that's just advertising or an affiliate link, it's the first time they've ever actually penalized people for not doing something. They penalize people for taking advantage of things, of looking for loopholes and exploiting them. But it's the first time they said, if you don't go off and do these things, then we're going to hammer you for it. The problem is really Google's when it comes down to it, from a search perspective. If they were able to detect a sponsored link versus non-sponsored link without us labeling it, they'd be able to solve that problem. They wouldn't need us to take care of that problem for them. However, they're unable to solve that problem to a great extent, although they do have some ways of detecting things and manually reviewing them later, and then they flag through and go through those. But to answer your question is, if you are found out to have been doing this, to selling links without full disclosure, using a nofollow or another tactic like using a redirect that passes through what's called an excluded file, then you'll get possibly punished for doing it. So it's something you just need to be aware of and make sure that everybody in your organization knows about this, especially if they're off selling advertising or they're talking about the benefits of selling links for SEO or any other reason. So just something to be aware of. Okay, so getting into links. We've talked about some of the ethical stuff or some of the pitfalls, and then there's the reality of how does Google use these links to help figure out what any web page is about. The problem with using text links is that we don't always link the way that Google might think that we should be linking to get that same kind of vote. If we look at this is a post from the O'Reilly Radar from last year, where we have, it's a great post, and we talk about the monoscope and how it makes me happy every day, or how the projectionist, there's a Wikipedia page for the term. So if I click on that link, I know I'm going to the Wikipedia page for the term. I know it's in the context about the projectionist, but the text link itself isn't very clear that I'm going to more content about the projectionist unless I can see the context around it. So they have to look at different things, but typically they still are really focusing in on those text links more than anything else. So that's part of the problem. The other problem is that most mainstream news media, they don't link out, or they haven't linked out in the past. They tend to link to themselves a lot more, partially because they're trying to get the page views up because they're selling advertising. Or they're trying to consolidate their page rank to make sure that their pages are the ones that rank for, say, Ford Motor Company or Kurt Corcoran. And in some of these profile pages, when they finally do link out, they use a text link like website. So if you're trying to get ranked for website, then get a link from the New York Times. Now, what's really interesting is just a couple days ago, New York Times, headline news, mainstream news outlets start linking to other websites. So if this is big news, just as of this week, it indicates that there's a paradigm shift that's starting to happen. This is really something that in my mind, should have been happening a long time ago. It's really frustrating as a user to read all about this new website that was launched and have not even link over to it. So I think that there's some new thinking that's going on about using what's called link journalism. This is a quote or a term that was coined by the guy, I can't remember his name right now, Scott Karp at Publishing 2.0. And he talks about link journalism as a way, if we link out, we become authorities, we become a resource for people to come back and look at our content more. And we have to really, to my mind, we have to get out of this thought of linking out to other people is bad because Google doesn't like it. That's ridiculous. The idea that we are hubs and authorities for resources is, I think, a more important concept to focus on, that people will actually come back to us more, and which will actually, in the result of that, would be that the page views go up and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things to consider with this. So to follow down on the thread with links about really how important they are, one of the questions that was asked by one of the attendees in the Excel spreadsheet that was sent over was, what is the difference between the importance of content and the importance of those links that come to them? So there's going to be a balance in anything. Everything has a context. To highlight the importance of how important these links are, though, and to highlight how dumb Google really actually is to look at this classic example of click here. If you were to go to Google and type this in, you get a bunch of pages back that say Adobe Reader Download or the Currency Exchange Converter or DoubleClick. Now, take a second and just look at this thing and ask yourself, why is it that these results are the ones that are coming up? If we look at the Adobe Reader Download page as an example, and we actually go to the page and we look at the page, the words, click here, don't appear on the page anywhere. So in order to try to figure out why this might be happening, not just in this example, but almost any example, one of the first things you can do in terms of a free tool is to actually go to Yahoo. Yahoo is probably the single best free tool you have to diagnose problems that you're having over at Google. Specifically, there's this tool called Site Explorer. And if you go to Site Explorer, you can type in any URL, and it will tell you how many pages that you have in the index related to that URL and how many links they're pointing to it. In this specific situation, they're actually saying that there's 26,000 pages that begin with this text string where there's a read-step2.html. So we'll get into why that might be happening a little bit later. The important thing is that there's over 22 million links that point to this page. And if we look at some of the examples of those pages, the majority of them look exactly like this. Click here. So that's the only reason why this is really actually happening. So this may not be the best example in the world to talk about for us, unless, of course, you happen to be an interactive branding agency by the name of Click Here. So these guys made a branding mistake or a market mistake to an extent by calling themselves something that was going to be very hard to get themselves ranked for because of the way the Google algorithm works. It's a failure on Google's part. It's also a failure on the company who tried to get ranked for that list, or ranked for that word, and it's not really a good result for anybody. So one of the main points to take away from this, to my mind, is the fact that Google is broken, and we have opportunities to help them fix their problems by doing what's called transparent or white hat SEO. Another example that's maybe more specifically related to the topic for today is More Magazine. This is a magazine that's published by Meredith Corporation, and it's targeting women who are over 40. And if we go into Google and look for more, what's interesting is that we get a see results for query at the bottom for More Magazine. So they're matching my query to other queries that people have done that are related to that and say, well, maybe you're looking for this, but we really think you're looking for our products. Now, maybe that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because why would somebody just looking for more want more Google products? I mean, that seems to be somewhat self-serving. This wasn't an intentional thing. It's a byproduct of or a side effect of the algorithm. If you look around the web, you can find a lot of examples that explain why this happens. Right there at the top of that very page we're looking at, or any page that's on Google, you'll have those vertical links at the top. And if you click on More and then scroll down to Even More, you'll see there's an Even More link that takes them to the More Google Products page. So, of course, they're going to show up. They'll even show up for Even More, which is the actual anchor text that leads into that page. So they continue to rank for this because mostly of the links that are coming into it. Now, we can go farther with this. We can go back to Site Explorer, and we can look at a combination of two different tools. One is using Site Explorer in combination with a tool called the SEO Link Analysis tool. It's a Firefox extension. And what it'll do is it'll actually pull in not just the URLs that are linking to that page, but it will then highlight all the text links that describe that page. And so we can actually see, well, actually there's a lot of Google blog, the official Google blog on Blogspot has a lot of links to more. You can actually go to that site and see what it looks like, but that's the reason why this is happening. So that's how dumb this thing is, and that's why there's a lot of opportunity for us to figure out how to get our content out there. So these are some of the tools that we mentioned out there. There's tons of information or tons of tools that you can use like this to help you really quickly diagnose situations. Search status is another one if you haven't downloaded that yet. Definitely go check that out. And SEO Quake is another one that you might want to take a look at because it's great for sorting through and learning about how these things typically work. So in the end, this is not the user experience that Google wants to provide. They want to get better and they want to fix this. And part of that is our job to do. To wrap up on this thread a little bit, just a couple weeks ago, Eric Schmidt was talking to, I think it was the American Magazine Association. I might be getting that wrong. But he was talking about the fact that, really brands are the solution to these problems. The idea that bigger brands are the ones that are going to publish content that we can trust to get more in there. That there needs to be a bigger investment in journalism and in getting quality content out there because there's so much junk out there, what he calls the cesspool of the internet. Sure, a lot of it's spam, a lot of it's poor quality information, a lot of it's bloggers, whatever. And he's basically saying what we really need is not just for Google to fix the problem, we need people to go out there and publish better content. So, of course, he got a lot of questions from that audience, and they asked, well, what is it we can do to fix the problem? How can we get better rankings? And then his response was, well, actually, we don't want you to be successful, and I think what he means by that is we don't want you to go out and game the algorithm. The fundamental way to do this is increase your relevance. So, it's not the most solid argument I've ever heard from him, but the idea is that, brands are important to helping to get rankings. If you have a trusted brand, you can really leverage that and actually get a lot of rankings you might never have expected that you probably could have. But you can't do it without the benefits of understanding how SEO works on its most basic level. One last example to kind of highlight this idea. There was a book that came out not too long ago called Biology, and they're basically saying brands are really important. So on one hand, we're basically saying that brands are important for all activities in terms of how people trust us. If people really have a religious feeling towards the existence of a brand, and to use Apple as an example here, I might be more likely to trust it. Almost anything that they publish, I might be more likely to trust it, maybe possibly link to it, and then Google gets the benefit of that by ranking content that people trust. So with that example, why isn't Biology, the Biology website, ranking higher than Amazon or higher than a blog that's not even owned by Martin if you type in the word biology? So this is where we get into diagnostic processes, where we talk about the symptoms of trying to understand what's going wrong and how do we assess a problem specifically that we want to do, a specific keyword phrase. So we have to ask a lot of questions. Well, maybe it was a strategic mistake. If my name is Bob Smith, should I be trying to rank for Bob Smith? Maybe I should have branded myself in a way that make it easier for me to stand out and differentiate myself from the crowd. Or possibly it was a tactical mistake. I could have done something to the website that prevented that from happening. So we can actually diagnose these things. One is, and this is something you should write down on a sticky pad and stick next to your computer on your workstation and use it all day, every day for the next 7 days until you've memorized it and do it by habit. It's site:/www.domain.com, and you can find out what all the pages are on your website in terms of how Google sees it. And if you qualify that just a little bit more by adding a search term next to it, where it's site:/www.domain.com search term, you can actually find out which page Google thinks is the most relevant for that query on your site. It's called a site search. Now what's interesting about this is that there's this page where you can see the blue link is the title tag. It's the information that the webmaster put into the document, and it's the same information that shows up in the actual search results. That gives you a lot of control over the appearance of the result. But the biology page is the about page for Martin Lindstrom. So there's some odd things that are going on in here. This is the page that we were just looking at. This is the page that Google thinks is the most relevant one, but the headline for the page is about Martin Lindstrom. So there's some odd things that are happening on the site. Now, if we go to the home page, we can see, okay, well, there's the martinlindstrom.com banner there. If I look at the rest of the page, well, wait a minute, there's no actual text on the page anywhere. It's all in graphics and Flash, so that's a bit of a problem. If we go back in time, there's a tool you can use called Internet Archive, archive.org, and you can find out on your own websites for, between now and 1995, 96, different versions of the website you might have had to try to get a sense of what your history is. When we talk about doing a diagnosis, it's much like medical diagnosis where you try to get a patient's history to find out what's going on there. And you'll find that as recently as January, there was no reference of biology at all. So there's some impacts to this. One page on any website can only be about so many different search terms. You want to make sure that every page on a website has a specific keyword focus. So the question that we have to ask first is martinlindstrom.com about Martin Lindstrom and terms related to that, or is it about biology, or is it about both? So if we go look at some of the free tools that we have, the Site Explorer tool, we'll bring in that list there, and we can actually see, well, there's lots of Martin Lindstrom-related text links that come back to that page because of the history, because it's been around for so long. It's more likely going to be about that than it would be to be about biology. He hasn't given his audience a clear path. He hasn't given his biology content a clear, singular destination that people could link to, and that's almost everything. So to fix the problem, that's another question. Identifying problems is easy. Solving them creatively is usually a little bit harder. There's a few simple things, though, that he could have done before he started this process, one of which was add a biology text link from his homepage to some destination content that really focuses in clearly that this is the biology page. He should have done this before he started promoting the book, because the best time to get links is while you're promoting it, while you're sending out the press releases, while you're talking to bloggers, while you're sending the books out for review. This is the best time to get those links, because after that, you're going to wind up cleaning up a mess of trying to contact people to fix things so that way you can get the rankings that you want. In terms of the URLs that he might use, you look at these and you can kind of get a sense of, okay, I can see that probably one of these is the right one here, and there's nothing necessarily wrong about any of these, but there are different pros and cons to using different types of domains to get ranked for this. So his current ones are the martinlindstrom.com domain, and then there's the biology page on the about page, and then there's these other domains down here that maybe there's a biology directory that on the Martin Lindstrom domain that we could put them on there. So there are multiple paths and multiple strategies that you can use, or tactical ways of posting that content on there. You can't buy biology.com because it's already been grabbed up and posted parked to GoDaddy, but you really shouldn't need that domain name. You probably have heard a lot about keyword domains and how great they can be for getting rankings, but that's not because they're keyword domains. It's because they attract better links. If someone describes themselves as being biology.com, then we're likely to get biology links. So you don't really need them. Sometimes it might create a little bit more work if you don't have a dedicated domain to it, but it's still possible to get a subpage listed and ranked at the top for some of these phrases. So this is the best time to get no links. We've kind of covered that one already. And now we can go back out and to our mind map and see if we can't get some questions answered. Or do you have any questions?
Well, there was a question to reiterate the Firefox extensions, which I think could actually be expanded to, are there certain key resources that people can rely upon? You mentioned the Yahoo site. You mentioned some of the Firefox add-ons. If people were going to start assembling their own little toolkit, what would you recommend?
Well, so let's go ahead and go into Firefox, and we'll give you a really quick tour. Okay, well, we're going to go to O'Reilly. We'll pick on them a little bit this morning. Okay, so with O'Reilly, there's a lot, oh, look at that. Okay, so there's a lot of information that we can glean from O'Reilly in terms of the history. So one of the first things I'd recommend everybody do is go out and download this little tiny thing called Search Status. You'll see this little copyright-looking symbol in the top left corner of my browser up here. If I were to right-click on this tool, you'll see that it gives me lots of information that I can help sort through. So right now I've got this thing selected to highlight any no-follow links that are on a page. So they'll usually pop up in pink, so that way I know whether a page is a URL or a link going out has been no-fault or not. So it's a quick way of just scanning for these things. You can get link reports. You can view meta tags and actually see the information behind any page without having to actually pop into the source code. More importantly, though, there are really quick shortcuts things here. You can go look in the Internet Archive, and you can go and take a look there. So the reason I would say search status is the first tool to download is because it gives you access to a lot of the tools we just talked about. So you can actually see that O'Reilly has got a history that goes back to 1997, and if we were to click on any of these links, we'd actually be able to see the bulk of the website as it existed back in that day, which can be very helpful for researching SEO issues. The Robots Txt file, every site needs to have one. Everyone will have a little file there, and this will tell you what pages that they're trying to tell Google we don't want you going off and crawling and indexing into the site. And then down here, if we look at backward links, not only does this give us a shortcut to Yahoo's tools, but it gives us a shortcut to all of the search engines really quickly. We can actually see domain external only or page external only. External text links mean inbound links from other domain names typically. So if we want to look at just this web page and see all of the internal links that are coming back, it'll really quickly open up more tabs, and we can take a tour. Oh, sorry, I started off on the wrong page here. And we'll go back to O'Reilly, and I'll do it there. Close these down. So that's one of the tricks. You need to actually be on the page when you start search status, otherwise you have the wrong information. Go back to that. Okay, so backward links, page external. Okay, so now we can get 3 tabs opening all at once. And that's part, let's see if we go back. I'm going to take this part of it out this time. We're still in the archive. My apologies. Let's try that one more time. There we go. Okay. So now this is something, you don't need this tool to go access this information. This query in particular is saying, I want to see in Google all links that point to O'Reilly.com, and does not include O'Reilly, the O'Reilly.com without the www. I'm actually going to take that out. You can actually see over here that they say 12 links there, and that there's 6,920 that are linking directly to this version of it. And as long as we're talking about it, we can actually look at the www version of O'Reilly and see that, okay, they also say that as well, so they've canonicalized that in this case. So if you're familiar with URL canonicalization, there's different ways of querying these things. You can determine one version of a URL versus another. Which
hey, Jamie, one quick question.
Yes.
What is the name of this plugin?
Search Status, the Firefox extension.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I want to go back into our mind map. So if you haven't figured out by now, I can talk pretty fast, and I feel like now that we've covered all that information, we can take a little bit more time to slow down and lingo over some of these other issues. And you feel free to jump in with questions as we go here back, but I'm just going to kind of go over a few different things that people should be thinking about.
Actually, there are a couple of interesting questions that just came in if you want to take on those.
That sounds great.
First one was, these examples use intelligently named URLs, but what about pages generated by a database?
Okay, that's a great question. Search engines have long had problems crawling websites that use URLs that have a lot of parameters in them, for example. And the reason that is because a lot of dynamically generated websites will spin off a lot of URLs that don't necessarily exist as unique pages, but that get them trapped into what's called a spider trap. So as the search engine crawls your website, it's going to be looking for which URLs they're going to index. And if you have dynamically generated URLs, you can create those problems. So it's typically better to use what look like static URLs, but you can create those from any website by using rewrites and redirects on a server level. So if you don't know what that means, you can go talk to your IT guy and he'll explain that to you more. But the idea is that if you have a URL with parameters in it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it won't get crawled, but it possibly could indicate that Google may have a problem as it's getting in there. They actually used to ignore URLs that had question marks in them because anything after a question mark usually indicates that it's going to go down that path. And they're actually now fine with crawling those URLs, but the main thing is does your website create any spider traps as the crawler is going through and finding them? And there are tools that you can use to test that yourself. And one of the best tools you could ever sign up for, in fact, when we talk about the SEO process, one of the very first things we ask clients to do is to verify their sites in Google Webmaster Tools. If you haven't done that yet, go do that now. Because when you go to Google Webmaster Tools, we can actually pull up what the page what it looks like, but the idea is that you can verify that you actually own the website. And they'll tell you more information about what they know about you more than anything else. And we're not going to spend too much time talking about that today, because I think that if we do a later session, we might get more specific into how to diagnose these issues more deeply. But well, because they're not going to let me get in there right away without logging in. But they'll tell you information like not only who links to you or what content they know that's on your page, but they'll actually tell you where you're showing up for people who are actually searching for you. You can get some of this information from weblog and analysis files like Google, where they'll tell you what traffic is actually generating, or what search terms are actually generating traffic to your site. But the only place you're ever going to find out where you're showing up that you weren't aware of before is by logging into that tool, and it'll tell you that as well. One of the main strengths about this thing is it will actually tell you how many pages that they have indexed and problems that they run into as they're discovering these spider traps. Whether it might be that we found a bunch of pages that don't seem to be working anymore, or we're having an issue by crawling your site. They give you a lot of data that you can't get anywhere else. So to answer the question about dynamic versus standard URLs, there are different ways of addressing them and different ways of diagnosing them. But the main thing is, are they creating traps? That was a long-winded answer to the question. I hope that was good enough.
I have one other question. Back in the day, links from the Yahoo directory and the Open Directory project were the ultimate inbound links. Is that still true? And if so, are there good strategies for achieving these types of links? And maybe just backing up a little bit, maybe explaining what those directories are and how they work.
You bet. Well, so back in the day, Yahoo was a directory, and that's all it was, before it was ever even a search engine. So when you went to the Yahoo homepage, instead of seeing a search box and all this information, you would actually see, let's see, we go to the directory isn't even listed prominently anymore. Here it is right there. You'd see something that looks more like this, where we have our different categories we can go into. So let's say if we go into recreation and sports, and here we go. This is a more traditional view of what we've been used to seeing. So the thing is, very few people ever go down this route anymore. Since we've really started using search engines more, there's really not as much of a reason to go into these directories. Typically speaking, when we talk about link building or going off and getting links, whether it's from a directory or anywhere else, one of the first things we ask is, is it going to help my SEO? But more importantly, is it going to send me traffic? Because if it sends me traffic, it's more likely going to be one that's going to help me with my SEO. It's not always necessarily true. Sometimes there are going to be some links that don't send you much traffic at all, but are really, really great for SEO, and those are a little bit harder to find. But with directories specifically, the thing about Yahoo is that if you want to get your link submitted and included in the directory, they're desperate for cash. They have been for a long time, and they want to charge you not just to review and submit it like they used to, but they're charging you an annual fee just to keep it in there, which, it's hard to stomach. And so, there's a lot of reasons why you might decide it's worth the money if you have a keyword phrase that's really converting well, and you want to create a Yahoo listing that helps you rank because you get that extra benefit. It might be worth it, but for a lot of clients, it's not. And for big publishers or publishers that have tons and tons of keyword phrases, other than getting ranked for your own brand name, which you're probably not going to have that much trouble with, it may or may not be worth the path. It's not usually worth the trouble to get listed there just for the sake of getting traffic, because nobody goes there anymore. So to answer the question in terms of whether they're the go-to places anymore, absolutely not. There's a lot of other places that are far more valuable to get links from.
Okay, great. I think we can move on to the next section.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think actually I'm going to probably skip over this section because we went through some of that stuff here. This is actually something I think that's kind of important for people to keep in mind with the current economic situation that we're in right now. that when it comes to advertising, if you do have an advertising budget, you might feel it shrinking right now and you're trying to figure out where to put it. A lot of us are probably moving more of our money away from TV and away from radio and into online. And a lot of that online money is going directly into search advertising. That's Google AdWords and Microsoft and Yahoo's platforms. And there's a lot of other third-tier programs that sell contextual advertising and that kind of thing. But search is really where the money is. And let me go a bit deeper into this. The reason that it's so much more effective than, say, display is that the ads that are triggered, the text ads that are triggered based on intent. If I do a search query, I'm explicitly saying I'm looking for this type of, Mini Cooper 2007, as opposed to, finding it on a automobile website, having a display ad. There's a lot more measurable activity and it's a lot more effective than, say, spending your money, on radio or whatnot. So that's why that's happening. But if we look at the search budgets that are happening, or the budgets people have for search, and we look at the difference between organic listings and paid search, then we need to understand really what the volume of traffic is and what the potential is for getting traffic. And so one of the first things I wanted to look at was what's called the search golden triangle. And this is something that Gore Hotchkiss and Quiro came up with, the guys that did it in iTools. It's a heat map where it tracks people's eye moving activity as they're looking through search results. So you should be able to, on your screen right now, be able to see all the red activity is where people really spend most of their time looking. And the blue is a little bit cooler, and obviously everything else they just don't really go to. And there's a very distinct F-shaped pattern that people typically go to. And the reason this happens is because after a while, people become adapted to the user interfaces that they see. The reason that all the other search engines have started moving more over to these Google-looking types of results is because they knew that more people were using Google. They were liking that experience, and so they started to adapt to that. Now all of a sudden everybody looks the same. But now that we're trained to do this, we're also trained to do certain types of activities where we really quickly, within microseconds, we're scanning and making decisions about what we see there. So you can see that most of the search activity from all the people who are monitored doing this are looking at that top 3 list of results. They're scanning a little bit over to the right, they're scanning a little bit down, but very few of them actually go over and look at the paid results at all. Taking it a little bit farther, we can actually look at some of the data about the sponsored activity. This came from the same study, where they actually broke down in percentages of who looked at what. So if they looked at the ads, you can see that people who looked at all the pages, only 50% of them saw the first listing, and 40% saw the second listing, and it trickles down from there. So a small percentage, really, when it comes down to an aggregate, is less than 25% of people who ever go to a search result ever look over and click on an ad. That's a pretty small number. Now, those people tend to be a little bit more either confused about the difference between the two of them, or they're actually on purpose going to the ads because that they know they're going to find something that is going to be somebody's trying to actually sell something to them, which can actually be a good user experience in a lot of cases, considering all the junk that's out there. Now, if we look at the money, though, where it's coming from, last year they said the studies that came out from Jupiter Research was that there was $9.1 billion that was spent on paid search advertising. Now, if we look at organic, the numbers are a little bit different. Organic ranking visibility, and from that same eye tracking study, we can see that the first rank was 100%. So about 100% of the people that they studied looked at the first 3 listings in their view, and then it trickles down from there. So that top area, that small area, is what Gord Hotchkiss calls a real estate play, where it's all about location. And if you're not in that spot, you're missing out opportunity. And the only way to get in there is to do good SEO and provide good content and follow all these basics, because you cannot pay Google to be in those listings. You can pay Yahoo to include your URLs in their index. And it's a very expensive program. Well, I'm not going to get too much into that, but the basic point here is when it comes to Google, there's a very clear separation between editorial content, the search listings, and advertising next to them. A little bit farther down into the budgets, you'll see that 75% only ever click on just the organic listings, and then there's a lot of people who do a little bit of both. And the budgets that we have are $1.3 billion for SEO-related activities compared to the almost $10 billion for paid search advertising. So there's kind of a disconnect where most of the money for advertising or spending money for getting ranked in search results is going to the place where fewer and fewer people are actually going to click on. So that's how important SEO can be for some people. And there was a great write-up. A lot of this information came from a synopsis that Rand Fishkin wrote up on his blog just yesterday at SEO Mods. It was one of the better ties together. It's called The Disconnect Between SEM and SEO Ad Spending, I think. And the blog posting's there, so you can go and take a look at that on your own to get more information about it. In terms of the implications for SEO for publishers, the reason I think that there's a disconnect here, more than anything else, is because it's harder to understand, it's harder to visualize how to allocate money for SEO, and the reason that is because it's an investment, and it's hard to separate SEO from the work that your staff is doing. It's almost like web development to a certain extent. You know, the publishing process alone. If you integrate these practices into your daily workflow with a strategy in mind before you start, it's built into everything else. So it's hard to extract. It's hard to separate a budget out for SEO. But if you look at it as part of the regular development process, it starts making a lot more sense that a smaller investment in SEO is going to have much longer results. Because if you get those rankings, sometimes they'll stay there for years, as opposed to on an ad spend, you spend the money over there, the money's gone, and the traffic disappears as soon as the money runs out, as opposed to SEO, a small amount of money, sometimes a larger investment than you would say for advertising, but the results last a lot longer. So those are some of the benefits. And I know that a lot of publishers don't invest much in paid search at all, so that may not be an issue for them. But for those that do, it's something to definitely consider. Let's see here. Okay, so there's obvious reasons for why anybody should care about it, and there's some not so obvious reasons. In terms of real world business objectives, we have all these different things that we're trying to do. One of the ones that's maybe more overlooked than others is the customer service and engagement level. You know, like making money, obviously, it's something that's on everybody's mind. I want to sell more direct. But when it comes to helping people find your content, if your content's not marked up and tagged and linked to appropriately, people may not be able to find it from a navigation standpoint. Even if they're just trying to remember, where was that article or that book or that thing that I saw, how do I get back to it? And if your site architecture and your SEO is strong, then you're going to be helping them navigate back to this point. So that's something to definitely take a look at. It's not all about converting sales. It's about helping your readers reconnect with you down the road, because people tend to use Google as their starting point no matter what they do. Fewer and fewer people are going directly to a news website or a portal. They're going to Google to get back to the website they were just at, for example. Let's see here. Now, on the not-so-obvious reasons of why SEO might be important, we'll cover this a little bit here. It's the what you don't know. It's the great unknown. That's the thing that I think that most people need to be aware of, which really the bullet point here more than anything else here is that your best investment in SEO is going to be in education of your in-house staff. Because if everyone understands what their role is in terms of, you know, if I'm going to write copy, you know, what keywords are you to be thinking about? If I'm working on the servers, what do I need to do to make sure that the work that we've done isn't going to get screwed up by making some changes? You know, if we're going to migrate our website from one domain to a new domain, God forbid, what do we need to do to make sure that that's going to be a relatively seamless transition, or what do I need to know to maybe even avoid that possibility? So a lot of things that you should have in your arsenal for any website that counts on SEO in terms of helping them to fulfill their business objectives. So the process of trying to sort through this stuff can be kind of tricky. It's much like going to the doctor. You know, there's different scans and tests and things that you can do to help assess them out, but if you don't know what you're looking for, then you won't know where to look. So if we look at some of the tools that are available, and this is something we're going to only glaze over a little bit because we might get a chance to cover this in a later webinar, is talking about using different models for assessing things. One of the very first things that happens in the SEO process when somebody says, okay, well, look, we want to figure this SEO thing out, the ideal situation is usually going to be we are looking at launching a new website, want to make sure we're doing it right from the ground up. The reality is, hey, we just launched our website, and now we want to figure this SEO thing out. And unfortunately, the problem with that approach is that you have to go back and either redesign the website or restructure or make a lot of changes to it to get to where you want it to be in the first place. Instead of putting Band-Aids on it, you could actually start from the ground up and actually have a stronger foundation for building this stuff. So the process we typically go through is we start off with a health check, or an SEO health check, where we gather information. We look at the Internet Archive, we look at the web analytics. There's a lot of information you can gather, and you want to benchmark all that information so you know where you are right now. Hopefully you'll have a couple years of data that you can look at to get a sense of where you are, and then you can look at your strengths and figure out how to leverage them. From a first aid and CPR metaphor, they tell you to survey the scene. Get into the environment to make sure that you're not going to screw anything else up. Do no harm. And then you want to check for airway, breathing, and circulation, meaning that you want to check to see to make sure that Google, you're not doing anything to the site that's preventing Google from crawling you. How do you know if you don't know where to go to look? So there's a lot of things that you need to know institutionally to be able to figure these things out. But more important than anything else is the ability to learn or recognize the symptoms of a heart attack. How do you go out and find or see those symptoms? When you see the pain in the left arm, you know that maybe there's something you need to take care of. If you see a traffic drop in a certain way, then maybe you'll need to take a closer look at that. Let's go back into the diagnosis here. So there's a diagnostic process that we can go through, and there's another slide in here I wanted to make sure I got to. I'm not sure where. Oh, here we go. It's got to be in here. So there's a way of cross-secting the data. There's a model that came up with a buddy of mine, Derek Wheeler. He used to work at Market He's now the senior SEO architect at Microsoft. But he came up with this model for helping to frame the problem a little bit, called the IRTA model, where we start off with indexing issues, ranking, traffic, and action. And there's different things you can do to optimize each level of that. So, with indexing, some of the things you want to take a look at and track and monitor over time is how many pages do I have indexed in Google? How many pages do I think I actually have? And if I'm publishing an XML sitemap, how many of those pages are getting published, and am I publishing the right ones? Because sitemaps are a little bit tricky. Typically, I tell people if you have a small brochure kind of website, you probably don't need one. If you have a very complicated dynamically generated site, then you might need one, but you want to make sure that you do it very carefully, because if you send the wrong signals, you might not get the results that you're looking for. So this is some of the things to keep track of. Going into ranking, looking at the keywords and actually having a list of keywords that you can benchmark and track over time can be helpful. You'll probably spend more time checking things by hand than you will doing automated queries. There are tools out there, but those tools violate Google's terms of service. So there's ways of being able to automate some of it and hand check others. And you typically, if you're doing this on a regular basis, you're probably somewhat of an obsessive personality when you're doing SEO, or you turn into one, because you tend to check a lot of the same rankings over and over time. So it's definitely a dangerous path to go down. This is I know I'm jumping around here a little bit here, but when we get into the traffic stats, this is a good example of sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not when things are going wrong. This top screen is from a Google Analytics screenshot, where you can see that at one point this site was having a problem with traffic dropping down all of a sudden. Like, it would just completely disappear for a while, and then it would spike back up and drop back down. It would do this for a while, and that was a pretty clear signal that something was wrong. So fortunately for the client in this case, they had a very strong clue that there was a symptom that needed to be addressed. However, if you look at the screenshot down below, this client was having the exact same problem. And they had no idea, because they never had the big, huge spike traffic fix. So by fixing problems that you don't even know are happening, you can see sometimes small bumps and sometimes very significant bumps in traffic by making sure that those things are addressed. Let's see. Any questions coming up in that?
There was one question in regards to sitemaps, and without going into intricate technical detail, because I think it could probably be a webinar unto itself. There's a question about the difference between a static sitemap page on a website versus using the Google Sitemap tool. Don't know if you wanted to just briefly touch on that.
Yeah, no, it's an important clarification. Typically, when we used to talk about sitemaps, we were talking about HTML text links, and how they were broken out. So that way, if your site architecture wasn't perfect, then either a user or the search engine could come along and they could find their way around by clicking on those links and seeing where everything was. And so that was useful. Now later we came up with XML sitemaps. And it's a very different thing. It's like most of us probably had never actually viewed them before in a browser, and they're not really very pretty to look at. But they're structured data, the structured list that we can submit to Google to let them know, hey, these are the URLs that we think that you should crawl. And there's certain things about that in terms of like setting priorities, telling them, giving them certain clues about how they can do it. So there's a very big difference between the two. So there are pros and cons to all of those things, and there's no one approach that's universally right for any one website. But I would just suggest that when it comes to the HTML text links, there's no problem with having them on your website. So feel free to add them however you feel is appropriate. When it comes to XML sitemaps, tread cautiously.
Okay, great. I think we could probably jump ahead to the publisher section.
Okay, great. Okay. So in the last few years, we've seen a lot of patterns emerge with the kind of conversations that happen around, how do publishers figure out, what do we do about this whole Google thing? Some of the more common questions are, like with title queries, like we want to be able to outrank Amazon. Amazon constantly outranks us for the name of our own books. So how do we solve that problem? In fact, we can go and take a look at a fairly good example here. I'm going to bump up the text a little bit so it's easier to see what's going on. So this is a search for Audacity of Hope. So this was Barack Obama's book. They wrote a couple years ago, I think now, maybe last year. And you'll notice that there's some listings here. There's a Wikipedia listing. There's an ontheissues.org section on it. Amazon.com is in there. New York Times has a review about it. So where's the official book? Well, why isn't that listing in there? So there are certain things that you need to think about in terms of going back to like name game and branding. They actually, if you go and pick up a copy of the book and you look inside the cover, you'll actually see that they did in fact register audacityforhope.com, and they actually put up a web page there, but it was actually redirected to what's now living on the Random House site. There's a website that was built there that's very pretty and looks good, but it's mostly graphics. And there's not a lot of clues to let people find it in the first place. And so if they had launched it and promoted it more as a book blog, for example, or had deeper content about the topics around, his campaigning or whatever it might have been, it would have been really easy for them to gain a prominent listing in there. And one of the effects of doing that is he'd actually have a stronger voice in here to say what he'd want to say, or have his campaign say what they want to say when people are looking for content around the book. Not just what Wikipedia has to say, but they'd be able to get into the conversation a little bit more there. So one thing to keep in mind is when you think about if you're a book publisher and you have a catalog of different book titles that you've published, you are never going to outrank Amazon. Not to say that that's actually completely across the board true, but that is typically the rule of thumb. The reason is because Amazon is a different fish in the ecosystem. They're more of a large shark in the sense that they're a mammoth. The name is very appropriate. They have a lot of different pages, lots of different cross-linking going on, a huge affiliate program that's gotten them a lot of traction. A lot of people are just linking to them just because they say, well, here's where you go off and buy the book. That's one of the reasons why Amazon does so well. But if you have that dedicated branded domain name for the book, you should be able to outrank them every single time consistently if you've promoted it right from the beginning. So that's one thing to think about. One of the other more common questions is this dilemma between Google Books search and universal search and where things show up. So let's see if I can't find an example here. Here we go. So, okay, Ender's Game. All right, so in Ender's Game, there's a listing down here from Google Books. So we did a book search, and now all of a sudden we're seeing something in the threshold has happened where Google is now importing that listing so you can get into the Google Book search and start looking at some of the content, whatever. So one of the questions that we actually talked to the folks at Google Books and asked them, well, what are your thresholds, for making this happen? And they said, well, we're still experimenting and we're still changing. So, it's kind of a moving target right now. And typically, the most common time that it happens is when somebody's doing book title searches. Occasionally, it'll come up for category terms. If you want control, though, over where you show up, or if you want more influence outside of what Google's just doing by scanning your books, you need to make sure that it's in a format that they can understand, which is HTML pages. And there's ways of thinking about that, especially if you're going to move into a new vertical. So we'll get into that here in a second. Let's see here. But to put a finer point on this point is a lot of people have come to the conclusion that what they're going to do is they're going to scan their own books, which is fine, and then post them online in a graphic, which is not fine. Because if you take a screenshot of one of your pages and put it in there, hoping that Google's going to come along and see that, it's not going to work. Even if you have layers of XML or other things that are giving them clues about what the content is about, it's not going to work because they need to actually have that text in HTML text so they can scan it and they can read it. So that's something else. If you have any questions about approaches for that, we can talk about that too. Selling direct, well, we kind of addressed that already here, but it's definitely one of the more common concerns is people, wanting to figure out how do I sell books directly to consumers as opposed to going through Amazon or my distribution network. And one of my arguments is if you do this thing that we're talking about for each of your titles and each of your authors, and you have partnerships and relationships where we're supporting your authors to go off and get these kind of websites built so that we can rank more, that's going to at least give you a voice to be a direct seller to your customers whenever you can. Let's see here. I'm going to go to, so that would, here, let me make sure I covered all these things here. Oh, this one here, ISBNs and URLs. So this is a little bit more on the out there. I probably should save this for a later session where we talk about URLs specifically. But one thing to take a close look at, if I know that Random House is very great about letting me pick on them a little bit here, so I'm just going to pull up a couple of pages here. And, oh, hey, here's a great one. Here's the Google story. Okay, so if you look up in the URL up here, you'll notice that they have the URL structure where they're displaying their ISBN number, which is, which is a great way for helping them automatically and programmatically create all these dynamic URLs based on the URL. One of the things that they were very smart about, even before I came along, was that they were able to map their ISBN 13 URLs and their ISBN, the older models, and they actually had multiple URLs that actually returned the same page, but they were able to set up their redirects appropriately so things works that way. There weren't multiple issues. Now, the reason this is important is because if you have multiple URLs with the same content, Google's got to figure out which page is the right page. They're trying to clean up their index by making sure that they're not providing the same result more than once. And they're pretty smart about it, but they don't always get it right. And so if you have a lot of dynamically generated URLs in this case, you want to make sure that you have what's called a canonical URL for every single page in your website. If you have 2,000 pages on your site, you want to make sure that there are only 2,000 URLs. More often than not, though, most sites have twice that number by virtue of having two different versions of the same domain on it. So I'm going to bring up an example here. If we were to take out the www from Random House, you'll notice that they redirect back to the www. So if I request a URL that does not contain what's called a canonical host name, if it's not resolved properly, they use what's called a 301 redirect to make sure it's mapped to the right place. This is really, really important because if you don't do this kind of stuff, you can create massive amounts of indexing and ranking issues. It's a simple thing to understand conceptually, but really hard to verify that everything's been done appropriately. So it's important to have a process where you're going through that stuff and making sure it's all cleaned up appropriately. And as long as we're talking about it, I'm going to go ahead and go into Site Explorer again. And we'll just go ahead and take a look at the, well, here's the biology example that we have. So if we look at Yahoo's take on the biology site, you can actually see, okay, well, we've got, it looks like, oh, no, sorry, that was the Martin Lindstrom.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Jamie?
Yes.
Jimmy, I think you closed that window that you should not have closed, the event in progress window.
Oh, no.
And we lost your desktop.
Oh, no.
So that's okay. You can come right back if you can find it again. I know you've been clicking all over the place.
I moved pretty fast. Sorry about that. Here we go. Okay, looks like I'm getting back in now.
All right. So let me make you, once again, the presenter here. And
sorry, guys.
there you go. Now you'll need to do the share again in desktop, and everyone, that'll open another window. So, hey, it happens a lot.
Okay, great.
So, there we go. Thanks.
All right. Okay. All right, let me get back into, can you guys see that okay now? Can you guys see my screen now?
That's perfect.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I've got your desktop now.
Okay, all right. So jumping back into it. So we were looking at Site Explorer and looking at the martinlindstrom.com domain name. So I know this is going to be a little bit geeky and a little bit technical for some folks, and so you don't have to spend too much time getting obsessed about the details like I might, but this is something that somebody in your organization really needs to be watching out after, and here's why. If I go to Yahoo Site Explorer and I do a search here, they'll tell me, okay, well, I've got 3,000 URLs. Site's been around for a long time, and it's got 10,452 links that point to that domain name. And I can refine things a little bit. I can say, well, let's see, what other pages were on the Martin Lindstrom domain? We're going to look at a sub-page here someplace. It's not wanting to go back for some reason. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we have our, here we go. Marketing expert Linda, brand management by Martin Lindstrom, another at the video blog. We have Brand Sense and Brainchild, which I think was it's a book and DVD page here. So this is probably a good one to take a look at. So we're going to go and explore that URL. Now, this also could be a good tool if you have a specific page that's not showing up, or maybe you've got the wrong page showing up. Maybe there's a different page than you would have expected to show up. So if we look at this, we can actually look at the links that Yahoo knows about, the links to that URL, and see where they come from. Brandsense.com, brandmagnet.com, bookmark sync. Okay, so there's various different links that come into it. So we can see that there's 46 pages related to that URL. There's in links for them. But if we do a few tests, we can look at Martin Lindstrom without the www. And okay, so we're not getting any links. So it looks like that actually has been taken care of to an extent. Let me find a better idea here, better example here. Let me go to look at O'Reilly. Okay, so Yahoo is telling us here that they know about 1 million, almost 1.5 million links that go to the www form of O'Reilly. And I know that they have recently taken care of their canonicalization issue by making sure that everything maps to the non-www version, keeping in mind that it doesn't matter which one you pick as long as you're consistent across your whole website. But if we look at the data on the O'Reilly without it, they show, well, there's 297,000 links that point to the non-www version of O'Reilly. So home pages, typically, this kind of stuff gets sorted out pretty quickly. And the number of links and the quality of all those links are going to two different versions of the same URL. Even though the page is the same, the URL is different, then your page rank is going to get diluted. If you have 5 votes going to Hillary and 5 votes going to Barack, then your voting power is getting diffused. And so if you decide to canonicalize those two into one primary candidate, then all of a sudden your voting power is getting a lot stronger when it comes to the general election down at the end. So to take that analogy a little bit further, there's a lot of different candidates in the primary. There's not just O'Reilly.com, but there might be also O'Reilly index.htm, possibly. Index files are typically a problem that you need to take a look at. because that really could be the same one. So here we have 297, so it looks like that might be canonicalized in their end. So there's things that you want to do to troubleshoot to make sure that there's only one URL for every page on the site. So that's I'm going to stop the geek exploration there and come back out to some more general issues. Okay. So in terms of thinking or approaching any new problem, a lot of this has been, we've been jumping across, the map quite a bit here. But if there was any one thing I think I'd want people to walk away from today is how to think about creating a strategy for adapting your content into a way that makes sense online. Sometimes the strategy is going to present itself. I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit. I'm going to use one of my clients here. And we'll talk. Let me right before I get to that, I'll just kind of finish up on this point here on the strategy. There's different ways of thinking about creating a strategy. There's a book by Reason Trout where they talk about marketing warfare and how to see yourself. Are you a guerrilla player, or are you going to be a in a defensive position because you're a market leader? You have to figure out where you are in that space. You may not know yet if you haven't actually taken the steps to go down that path. So there's different ways of cross-secting that data. And then thinking about the verticals that you're in. So, in this case here, so, we have the travel guides, as a vertical. So, Voters and Lonely Planet and Farmers, they publish guidebooks for about every state and country and sometimes city on the planet, and they have lots and lots of content that they have locked up in those books that they are migrating eventually onto the web. And so, they're all facing different challenges because they're doing this content migration and republishing all the new stuff every single year. So it's a big undertaking to get all that stuff out there. But in terms of keyword strategies, some things just present themselves automatically. Maybe I want to rank for travel guides to China or China travel or whatever it might be. And so there's some top-level terms, things that are related to travel actually having the word travel in them. But then there's going to be a lot of other long-tail categories that are related, such as hotels, hotel reviews, restaurant reviews, and then even all the way down to the names of businesses, ranking for other brand names. Yelp is a really good example of a company that really built up using user-generated content to help build up a lot of rankings for different types of restaurants and things like that. And so they get a lot of the traffic where people are actually searching for, a restaurant review in San Francisco or for, Bella Capelli, whatever it might be. Review in hair salon or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of different things that you can think about. Sometimes they're not as obvious, though. You may be a generalist publisher and have a lot of different, books on different topics. Maybe you have, a lot of different, biographies, for example. So let's say that you have, 20 books on different U.S. presidential biographies, and you consider, well, what do we do with that content? Well, I could potentially build out a website for each of those books. So now I've got to build 20 different websites, but I'd probably have a pretty good shot at ranking for terms related to George Washington or Bill Clinton or whatever it might be. Or maybe I want to go down the path of aggregating all that information into a keyword vertical related to U.S. presidents and their campaigns, whatever that might be. So there's different tactics that you can do, and sometimes it's appropriate to do a little bit of both. As long as you're not creating duplicate content, you're not posting the same content in more than one place. So there's different tactics you can take to map those strategies once you figure those things out. So doing keyword research and understanding not just your market verticals in terms of whether you're going to get into finance or whatever it might be, but understanding within those market verticals what your keyword verticals are. That is a whole session onto itself, but maybe we'll get a chance to do a little bit of keyword research talk before we wrap up here. In the end, though, when you're talking about strategy, you are going to have to make some tough choices. You're never going to be able to rank for everything that you want to rank for, but you may be able to rank for a lot of things you never even considered doing. So if you take the time to map this stuff out, it's worth the time. Most SEO is 80% mapping and planning and 20% execution. So that's probably where most of your investment time is going to go into. along those lines, there's scalability issues to be concerned with. I can spend a lot of time getting one small 30-page website out there that gets, a decent amount of traffic, or I can do something that's going to create 100,000 different pages that are going to rank for a lot of different phrases that gets quite a bit more traffic. So there's different ways of looking at it. So in terms of your publishing cycle, there's scalability issues. In terms of staffing, there's scalability issues. When you're doing SEO, you're going to have to make some choices about what parts you take care of in-house and what parts you're going to outsource. And typically, I would really recommend that people think about keeping as much of their SEO knowledge in-house as possible by maybe bringing some outside help in occasionally. But if you try to outsource everything for SEO, then you're really not involved in the process. And if you think it's worth it doing, it's worth trying to find the resources internally to make sure this is watched after. And the reason being is that if something happens on the server level, or somebody decides they're going to make a change for branding purposes, if you don't have that SEO knowledge built in-house after you're done with your contract, then you're going to wind up screwing up a lot of things that you didn't need to screw up. But instead, if you have it integrated internally, it fosters a lot of conversations about, not just solving the search problem, but also solving, say, usability issues, because they really go hand in hand in a lot of cases. So I'm kind of going down the path here, but basically the point being is that in-house tends to scale better than outsourcing in a lot of cases. However, you might find situations where you own a lot of book titles and you don't have the resources in-house to build out all those little microsites. So one possibility would be to develop a Webmaster outreach program, for example, where, say, okay, well, look, we have this author, we have this book that we're going to be promoting, or maybe we have something on the backlist, and we thought maybe we'll build a website and a blog around it. Maybe if you found a webmaster with some SEO knowledge that you trusted to go off and build a content site like that for you, you could possibly split the revenues from any direct sales that come off of the book, or build up partnerships in that way. So there's other ways to address that. So there's a lot of creative things that you can do that aren't immediately apparent. And a lot of you guys are going to have a lot of other ideas I'm not talking about right now. So if you have anything, feel free to share. So tactics, I thought it would probably be better if we were to save that for a later session. But there's a lot of different things to talk about in terms of microsites versus catalog sites and running roadblocks in search engines, so that way you can dominate the voice. If you have multiple websites that are about the same thing that you own, but the same keyword space, then you can actually have 4 or 5 listings in a search result as opposed to just the one. So, and there's ways of doing that without violating Google's terms of service or providing a bad user experience. Let's see here. Any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, we do have a few questions, and I'm not sure, I don't know if we want to venture straight into the Q&A component. I don't want to cut you off with anything. But one interesting question that popped up, it was an observation coupled with a question. It's difficult to outrank Amazon with a search term as a book title, but it's easier to outrank Amazon with a search term as the name of an author. Is this a strategic opening for publishers?
Absolutely. One of the caveats, obviously, is who owns the rights to the author name and what those partnerships are. HarperCollins, if you go and look at the way that they've solved the problem, I think it was very creative. They have a list of all their authors. They have, sometimes they have profile pages, and they link off to the author websites. And one of the effects of, one of the benefits of that is that if they're helping the author to promote their content, and by linking to them, they're actually giving Google a sign of trust that, hey, this is HarperCollins, and we're linking off to these author names. And so there's a lot of things you can do in terms of partnerships that will help not let Amazon dominate that listing.
Another question that came up, would it be helpful to buy the name of the book as part of the domain, for example, audacityofhopebook.com? Yeah,
that could be helpful, you bet. Especially if you own the rights to be able to do that kind of thing. That keyword domain names are very effective at getting good rankings, like we said, because of how people are going to link to them. So it's a clearer signal. So yes, absolutely that can work. For book titles, for branded keyword phrases, it's a really good strategy. Now, if you're trying to brand a keyword phrase, then you'll find that it's harder to compete down the road. You might find that, well, okay, here's a good example. searchenginemarketing.com is the name of my company, and I've never ever tried to get it ranked for search engine marketing. It's not something I necessarily felt that a one independent consultant shop should be ranking at the top for a phrase like that. So we can actually go and take a look, and we can give you a sense of what we're talking about here. Okay, so if we go to Google, we'll actually see that, hey, there's a Wikipedia entry that talks about some of the the ethical issues and the things that need to be balanced. The SEMPO organization, SEMPO had a really great strategy by actually calling themselves the Search Engine Marketing Professional Organization, because when people link to them, that's how they'll describe them in the text links. And also, they're an actual organization that people trust, and there's a lot of authority there, so people will actually say, hey, now this didn't used to happen. There used to be a lot of other sites that showed up there, including Search Engine Guide, which is a group of bloggers that are talking about what's happening in the industry. And there's lots of other websites that, some of these may not be as deserving as others, and there's different things that are happening there. Now, if we go and look at what's happening in Microsoft right now, oops. And I'm completely calling myself out on this. If any Microsoft engineers are looking at this, they're probably going to go address this pretty quickly. But I am ranking for search engine marketing in Microsoft. And the reason for this is not because my website is all those great shakes. It's a very simple brochure website. It's in dire need of updating, and I'm working on it right now. But I've been ranking actually #1 for the last year and a half, and now I've just dropped down to #2. And so, it's not because my website's all that great or I have that many great links. It's because they trust the domain name and the few links that I do have. They're focused on that more than they do a lot of other rankings, so it's a flaw in their algorithm. So, you could, as a black hat, say, okay, well, I'm going to really focus in on exploiting that loophole at Microsoft by going after that loophole and really focusing on those kind of keywords, but long term, it's not a great branding strategy.
Then we have one other question in regards to dealing with images, and I think this was related to the comment you made about the Audacity of Hope website, as it was primarily built off of images. Do alt attributes and image tags, are those helpful in dealing with images at all?
Okay, so I would answer that question by saying that Google uses almost 1,000 different signals now. And like in last year, there was an article in Popular Mechanics where he said that we just updated 450 of them. There's 200 of them that SEO Moz talks about on their ranking factorial, things that they consider easy to look at. And so every signal is going to be weighted a little bit differently. Text that's on the page is actually in HTML that you can see. That will be weighted more heavily than alt text behind an image. Text that are actually on an image can't be scanned and read by search engines yet. I suspect we're still a little bit of ways away before they start building that kind of thing into the algorithm. So until then, they rely on additional clues like alt text behind an image to help them give them a signal what that image might be about. So the trick with alt images or alt text behind images is to go ahead and use your keywords for the image if it actually describes what the image is about and it supports your overall strategy, but don't use it to stuff keywords and don't rely on it. It's not weighted nearly as heavy as the text that's actually on a page.
And we just had one question that came in. Do tagged PDF documents get built into the ranking equation of a website? I think that's similar to the alt text question.
So, sorry, say that one more time?
Do tagged PDF documents get built into the ranking equation of a website? I think maybe a broader question of that would be, how do you handle things that are non-HTML?
Okay, that's a great question. Okay, so to speak specifically to file formats and like what really your best strategies are, there's different schools of thought on whether or not you should even have your PDF files indexable. We actually advise a lot of clients, if they have content in HTML format on their website already that mirrors the PDF file, then we have them put those PDF files in a place where Google can't get to them, or at least they won't crawl them, so that way you're not dealing with duplicate content issues. The other downside to having PDF files in your search results is that if somebody does click on the PDF file, they immediately download the file, but there's very rarely a way for them to navigate directly back into the website that way. So having said that, there's no evidence that I've run into that that having those fields in the PDF file are going to help with rankings. I haven't seen that yet. Now, it could be that I've missed something there, so maybe we should go take a closer look at that.
Okay, a couple of the questions are coming fast and furious now. I guess we're getting indirectly into the Q&A area.
That's fine.
Before we do that, I just want to make sure that we don't cut you short on anything or any wrap-up. So if you feel like you want to loop back around to that, please feel free.
Let me just kind of jump through a couple of slides really quickly here.
Okay, and then we'll loop in, and please, everybody feel free to send your questions in, and then we'll use maybe 10 minutes or so to go through those.
Sounds great. Okay, so this last part here is what we call a SWOT. It's a strengths, weaknesses, observations, and the threats way of approaching a marketing analysis. So you can use a SWOT for any kind of marketing analysis, but specifically this one's targeted for SEO, specifically for publishers. So, in terms of strengths, one of the first things that comes to mind, I mean, before we started working with publishers, I used to always say I really wish I could partner with a publisher, because webmasters, and forgive me for being so crass in my comments over here, but webmasters really, really want to see want more content. It's their biggest challenge. Like actually scaling out these large websites and building out links. Some of that kind of comes naturally to them, even blogging. But the content creation is the hard part. A lot of publishers already have that in spades. They have not only amazing content that's really rich in potential keyword mapping, but it's also coming with experts and authorities in their fields that gain natural trust when people are linking to them. So that's definitely a strength that publishers have. Weaknesses might not be as clear. I think a lot of people are feeling, that I've talked to, are feeling like they're a little bit behind the curve. They're not necessarily sure where to start or what to do, and that's pretty much normal for all of us here. And there's also the same problem that, let's see, even if you're the New York Times, you are still combating the fact that people might be going to Google to find content that's in the New York Times, whether they're going to Google News or they're Googling for stuff in the web search. And then you might be dealing with legacy issues like content management systems or staffing or education or things like that. And these are real bears. Old content management systems aren't always very search engine friendly, and so there's always workarounds and things that you have to do to fix those things. So having a very clear, firm grip on your infrastructure and your resources is pretty important as you're doing your audit to figure out what to do next. So the opportunities are available. The opportunities are, in my opinion, like boundless. I think that if you're a publisher that's just now getting into the world of SEO, you picked a really good time to do it. You waited long enough where a lot of the black hat stuff doesn't work as well as it used to. And when I say by black hat, I mean more of the the tactical exploiting holes and really reverse engineering the algorithm, that kind of thing. Some people might say ethical versus unethical, but the tactical stuff isn't necessarily the stuff that most branded publications are going to want to go after. So now we're getting to the point where if you just do things in a white hat, transparent way, you should be able to get some really good results because you have a lot of authority. So to leverage that strength, there's different things that you can target. We've already talked about the different category terms and author names and book titles and the publisher branded keywords. And let me just touch on this one really quickly here, is that you may think that you rank for all your branded keywords, but you're probably wrong, because unless you've done the keyword research on this, you won't know necessarily how people might be searching for your brands. So it's important to start off, and this is actually one of the best places to start off when you're doing your keyword research, is to go to a tool like keyworddiscovery.com and sign up for a 1-month subscription and type in the name of your brand and just see what comes back. There's other ways of getting some of this information, but that's usually one of the quickest, easiest ways to start getting a sense of how this stuff works. And if you type in Random House, you're going to get back Random House children's books. You're going to get different types of imprints. You're going to different, O'Reilly has got a bunch of different branded keyword phrases that, in fact, sometimes they show up great and sometimes they don't show up where they should. And so there are some things that are happening on their site that they could do to fix that. That they're huge. They're it's a kind of a bear to get through all that stuff. But the point being is that if you look at all these different keyword phrases and you start off with your branded keyword phrases and all the permutations that include your brand in the keyword phrase, you should be able to rank for any of those phrases. If we get into a little bit deeper down here into category terms, obviously there's different things like lawn care or pressure cooker recipes. Actually, there's a great example. We just discovered this yesterday when we were doing a little bit of cooking. That was in Microsoft. I'm going to go back to Google just so I know that's what we're looking at here. Okay, so we have pressure cooker recipes, and so we have Miss Vicky, we have recipazar.com, and a few other things like that. And so this isn't necessarily pressurecookerrecipes.com, although that could be a good strategy for getting a rank. It's not really a great strategy for getting a brand. So pressure cooker is going to have a lot of different permutations to it, a lot of different words that might be related to it, not just recipes. We get into the long tail here. You can see that and actually I should clarify that in the publishing world we talk about the long tail a lot in terms of selling backlist books, and if you're familiar with that term already, there's a difference when it comes to search. The search long tail, every keyword phrase you have has got a long tail of some sort, and usually sometimes it'll be based off the permutation like we talked about in say the pressure cooker recipe down here. We've got pressure cookers, and then we have pressure cooker recipes or buy pressure cookers or pressure cooker canning. So these are very literal interpretations of the long tail. And even pressure cooker reviews is probably going to have a long tail. The long tail starts getting smaller and smaller the more specific that are not necessarily direct extensions of the permutation, such as missing manuals is one of their imprints. And so getting ranked for missing manuals or even O'Reilly missing. Just getting started in SEO, this is the low-hanging fruit. This is the stuff you should be able to rank for, and by going through the process of ranking for these phrases, you'll learn a lot that you can rank terms that are covered that already here into the threat zone. One thing to think about, well, actually, this is one of my favorite quotes from Tim. He talks about the difference between piracy and obscurity as threats, and he actually says that. Let me see if I can't recall this off the top of my head here. Maybe I actually have it here. Yeah, obscurity is a far greater threat to authors and creative artists than piracy. Not everybody I've ever talked to has completely agreed with that idea, but when you look at it from a search engine standpoint, that makes all the sense in the world, because if you don't have your content in a way that it's findable, they're not going to find you. So that's definitely something to think about. So if you're concerned about giving away your content for free, you have to balance it out with, if I don't give it away, some of it away for free, if I don't reformat it in a way that I can give it away for free without undermining the value of selling the book, then maybe there's a way of hashing that stuff out. So I'm not going to get too far into types of piracy. We can skip over that. Competition, though, this is probably maybe the more important one in this area here, is that competition isn't always who you think it is. You're going to get competition in search results from Amazon quite a bit, Wikipedia, different authors, different titles, different brands within the same industry or different industries. Like O'Reilly actually has O'Reilly Auto Parts as a possible contender for the word O'Reilly, so or even Bill O'Reilly, God forbid. So if you have all these things to balance out, there's a lot to consider. But search engines are actually competitors. There's a love-hate relationship that we have with these guys because, on one hand, they're saying, well, we're not a media company. Right. We're not a media company. We publish, maps and listings, and we have a lot of Google Earth data, and we have, all this content that we're rolling it up, and we're not just aggregating it, we're actually publishing it in a web view that you can see. So to say that they're not a publisher, they're not a media company, is a little bit disingenuous, but I understand why they're saying it. But we are competing with them. Like the Photos Travel Guide thing is a really good example where they used to rank a lot better than they do in some areas, especially when it comes to, like, say, local search, because now you get into areas where if I do a local search for something, I'm not just going to get a bunch of web listings that we might have ranked for, but I'm now going to be below a map with a bunch of other listings that include aggregated data. In fact, if I want to go and review a restaurant on Google, inside of Google, I can do that, and so they become an aggregator of content in that way. So competition is not always who you think it is, and it's important to assess the scene or survey the scene about who your competitors are, because if you build an SEO strategy for a specific keyword phrase, you want to make sure that it's going to have a long-term viability. So I think I'm going to put a nail in that coffin, and we can spend the rest of the time on questions if we have any.
Yeah, we've got a couple of great questions here. One of the interesting ones that came up was, is there anything to be said for social bookmarking sites like Delicious that people are increasingly discovering and navigating the web with?
Absolutely, yeah. There are definitely benefits to it. One of the questions you typically run into is priorities. There's usually plenty to do in terms of formatting content and getting it out there, promoting it with links, that kind of thing. A lot of these services, like social media services, are maybe even a better place to spend time, because if you build up profiles for, say for a book title that comes out, and you have a Facebook profile, even a Twitter profile, and a blog and things, you can actually get a lot more listings and rankings that way that will help support the overall strategy and campaign. So, getting listed on Dig, that's kind of you really kind of want to understand and know the system. The reason that people are successful in Dig is because they typically are so embedded inside that system that they know a lot of people that can help them get to the front page of Dig. And even though they do get, can still drive some big traffic bumps that will actually shut down sites, it may not be the best use of your time. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish from an SEO standpoint.
One thing that kind of popped up to me as we were going along is there any sort of guideline or average between when you start making tweaks and when you can start seeing the results of those tweaks through Google or any of the other different search engines? I know it's a case-by-case basis, but just to give people a sense of, is it immediate or does it take a while?
Well, Google will actually tell you in their Webmaster guidelines that there is no set time limit for anything. And different data is going to get rolled out at different levels. I've seen changes within a minute, and I've seen changes that don't take place for 6 months or more. So, a lot of it's going to have to do with how much authority your website has and how often they're going to come back and crawl your new content, and how many people might link into, individual pages on your site. So there's a lot of, things that, that need to be taken into consideration. So it's usually, when you approach these things, it's good to take a long-term view of, you follow the best practices, you promote it as best you can, and then sit back and just watch. And it's good to practice watching the results and monitoring things to see what's going to happen. If you're really impatient and you're monitoring your brand names or other names, the first thing I would do is go off and set up a Google alert for your brand. So anytime somebody types in, say, Macmillan, any blog post or any news reference or anything will come up in your alert on a daily basis to tell you when those listings are there. So that way you can see if somebody's writing something new about you. It's also good for reputation management, so you can see if somebody's slamming you, that you can go off and address them in a conversation or something.
One specific question that came in, is it a good idea to create a smaller mini site for a division or a different line of books, or should I just build that into my main website?
Well, I think that it's appropriate to do both if you have a thoughtful approach to it. If you have a microsite that's built off of your main corporate brand, because maybe that's just what your infrastructure and your politics maybe allow for, that's one strategy. As long as you promote it effectively and you have a clear link to it. But typically speaking, more often than not, from a user experience, people want to have a sense of place on the web. Pick almost any book that you can think of, and if you really want to go deeper into the content of the book and the topics around it, if there was a website that was dedicated to that topic, you might feel more affinity for it. As a blogger, you might be more willing to link to it, and it would certainly be more easy to find, because a lot of people are just going to guess at the domain name to find the site. So when you can, go ahead and at least the least you can do is buy the domain name and redirect it to the subpage that you have. But if you can, build up the page on the domain name. That would be my preferred strategy in most cases if you have the resources to do it.
Are there particular sites that it's great to get inbound links from? And maybe a broader question beyond that, should the focus be on getting those links or on the content development, and how should you sort of divvy up your time between those two things?
Well, anytime we get to prioritization, typically the first thing that comes up is, what can we do to make our website better? Instead of worrying about going off and and getting a bunch of links for a page or tweaking a few things for SEO purposes, we typically look at usability. We look at the marketplace. We try to figure out what is it that people really need right now and try to develop towards that. Because the best of SEO is providing really good content that people are going to respond to. So I would say that content would definitely be more important in terms of allocating resources. The flip side of that is that if you build up the content and don't at least get the momentum built up, from a standpoint where it starts happening more virally, then you may not get the traffic that you want anyway. So, if you're a big brand, you've got the advantage of, really quickly sending out an email, posting it on your homepage, and sometimes it'll take off all on your own. But if you're a smaller publisher that doesn't have that kind of reach, then you might struggle a little bit with it.
Okay, we have 2 questions left. First one is, what is PageRank, and why does it matter?
Ah, beautiful question. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is the difference between toolbar PageRank and real PageRank. So really quick, I'll open up the browser again, and we will go and we'll look at just by any page. Well, let's go look at Recipizar on their pressure cooker page. And you'll notice up over here, if you have the Google toolbar installed or if you've got search status installed, you'll actually see a little green bar here, and that's the toolbar PageRank that Google reports. And they're saying that this page has a score of 3 out of 10. Okay, so the first thing is that this is an aggregated number. It's, their representation of 1 out of 10 is an approximation. It's not your actual PageRank. Their actual PageRank is a longer factorial number that goes on for numbers of digits that helps, give them a more precise measurement. The other thing about the Google toolbar page is that it doesn't necessarily represent reality, because the first thing is that they don't publish all their toolbar PageRank as it actually happens. They publish it either on a quarterly basis or on a periodic basis. They do big push updates, and sometimes things get updated pretty quickly. So occasionally you'll hear about the big PageRank update that just happened, and people will start complaining or start celebrating because their PageRank changed. Typically speaking, in most cases, when you get those kind of PageRank fluctuations from the toolbar, you won't see any other indicators that things are really going better or getting worse. Your traffic probably won't change that much. Your traffic or your indexing won't necessarily change that much. It may possibly affect how, or maybe more of a sign of anything else that maybe that they trust your site more or less from that perspective. There is the possibility that some Google engineer actually hand-edited your PageRank. And for example, dinged for selling links on their home. It all came out is because there's a blogger by the name of Dave Naylor, who's an SEO in the UK, and he calls that these fall. There's days after, which is one of hundreds and hundreds of different signals that Google uses. It was one of the first things that really made a big difference in improving the Google algorithm, but it's one small part of all the signals that they use to help them deserve relevance. So don't obsess over it. You'll never know what your actual PageRank is going to be anyway. The toolbar PageRank is only going to tell you a little bit about what they, and it's not going to really have that many impact.
Up against the clock here, but one final question, Jamie. Understanding that there's a lot of nuance to SEO, what are the things that people shouldn't do?
Educate yourself about all these things to make sure you